Catherine Vance did not deal in objects, she dealt in liabilities. From her 42nd floor office, a glass-walled cage overlooking a city of monolithic steel and concrete, the world was a spreadsheet. Assets were green, liabilities were red, and her entire professional existence was dedicated to turning the latter into the former, or, failing that, excising the red from the ledger with the surgical indifference of a battlefield medic performing a triage amputation. She held a Mont-Blanc pen, its platinum-coated barrel cool against her skin, and hovered it over a signature line. On the phone, cradled between her ear and a shoulder draped in Italian wool, a subordinate droned on about the final disposition of assets from a recently acquired, and subsequently dissolved, boutique automaker. A company called Ethelgard. The tooling is sold, the patents are bundled for auction, and the real estate is pending closure, the voice said. That just leaves the miscellaneous physical effects in Warehouse 7B. Catherine's eyes scanned the final page of the dissolution document. A single line item caught her attention. 1. Non-operational prototype vehicle. Model, Prototipo V12. VIN, 001. Value, salvage. She drew a thin, impatient circle around the word salvage. Miscellaneous effects means junk, Henderson, she said, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. And what is this prototype? Another half-finished clay model. No, ma'am. It's a complete vehicle. Carbon fiber monocoque, bespoke V12 engine. It was their moonshot project. It doesn't run. We had it appraised. The consensus is a catastrophic electrical failure. The cost to even diagnose the intertwined systems is prohibitive. 9 specialist shops were consulted. The lowest quote just to identify the core fault, not fix it, was $310,000. They'd have to disassemble the entire vehicle. A dry, humorless sound escaped Catherine's lips. $300,000 to diagnose a car worth scrap metal prices. Liquidate it. Sell the warehouse. I want that entire acquisition off my books by Friday. The scrap value is negligible, given the exotic materials. It might even cost us to have it properly disposed of, Henderson offered, a note of caution in his voice. Then give it away, Catherine snapped, her patience gone. Find some local hauler and pay them to take it if you must. I don't care. Just make it disappear. She signed her name with a sharp, angular flourish, the ink a stark black slash against the white paper. The pen was capped. The decision was made. The liability was excised. She hung up the phone and turned her gaze back to the city, her mind already on a billion-dollar merger in another hemisphere. The car, and the failed company that built it, had already ceased to exist in her world. 200 miles away, in a town that appeared on maps but not in the thoughts of people like Catherine Vance, Elias Thorne was cleaning a set of feeler gauges. He wiped each thin, steel blade with a soft, lint-free cloth, the movement slow and deliberate. His workshop was not large, but it was immaculate. Tools hung on pegboards in precise, silhouetted rows. The concrete floor, stained with the honest ghosts of oil and coolant, was swept clean. There was a place for everything, and everything was in its place. It was a space that reflected the mind of its owner, ordered, methodical, and quiet. In a corner, seated at a small, sturdy wooden desk that had been her mother's, his daughter Lily was drawing. At 10 years old, she possessed a seriousness that mirrored her father's, her brow furrowed in concentration as she shaded the sky in a drawing of their small house. The only sounds were the soft whisper of the cloth on steel and the gentle scratch of her colored pencil on paper. This was their life, a quiet bulwark built against a world that had once been loud and chaotic. Elias had not always been a man who serviced aging sedans and local farm trucks. There had been another life, a life of titanium and carbon fiber, of computational fluid dynamics and engine management systems so complex they bordered on sentient. He had been Elias Thorne, lead systems engineer for Ethelgard, the architect of the very electronic soul of the Prototipo V12. He had designed its CAN bus network, written the code for its variable valve timing, and held the patents for its unique, redundant sensor arrays. It was a machine he knew not as a collection of parts, but as a living, breathing entity whose language he had personally authored. That life had ended. It ended when the funding dried up, when the dream of Ethelgard collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. It ended definitively a few months later, when the same aggressive cancer that had shadowed the final year of the project finally claimed his wife, Elena, the brilliant chassis engineer who had designed the prototypo's perfect suspension geometry. Faced with the wreckage of his professional and personal worlds, Elias had made a choice. He had taken his daughter, the last, most precious piece of his life with Elena, and retreated. He had traded the bleeding edge of automotive technology for the quiet certainty of a torque wrench and the steady rhythm of a life dedicated to one thing, being Lily's father. The old workshop phone, a black rotary model he kept for its resilience, rang with a jarring shrillness that broke the calm. He picked it up. "Elias," a voice said, familiar and urgent. It was Marcus, his former deputy at Ethelgard. "They're scrapping it." Elias said nothing. He did not need to ask what it was. In their shared history, there was only one it. "The private equity vultures who bought us out," Marcus continued, his voice tight with anger. "Vance Capital. They're clearing the warehouse. They listed the prototypo for scrap. Can you believe it? All that work. Elena's work. Your work. Turned to junk." Elias stood motionless, the receiver cold against his ear. He looked over at Lily, who had paused her drawing to watch him, her eyes wide and perceptive. He saw Elena in the curve of her cheek, in the intensity of her gaze. The prototypo was not just a car. It was the last thing he and Elena had built together. It was a monument of sleepless nights and shared passion, a symphony of engineering they had conducted side by side. The thought of it being crushed, its bespoke heart silenced forever, sent a cold, alien pang through his chest. It was not grief, precisely, but the feeling of a grave being desecrated. "Where?" Elias asked, his voice a low rumble. Marcus told him. He told him the name of the executive in charge, Henderson, and the name of the firm, Vance Capital. After he hung up, Elias stood in the silence for a long moment. He looked at his hands, calloused and clean. They were hands that could calibrate a throttle body to within 1,000th of an inch or write 10,000 lines of elegant code. They had been dormant, in a way, content with simpler tasks. Now, an old, familiar current stirred within them. He walked over to a heavy, gray filing cabinet in the corner of his office, a relic from his old life. He opened the bottom drawer, which was locked with a separate key he kept on his house keyring. Inside, beneath a stack of old schematics, were several thick binders. He pulled one out. Its spine was labeled, Ethelgard V12, P1, Electrical and ECU Architecture. He opened it on his workbench. The pages were filled with diagrams of a complexity that would have looked like abstract art to a layman. To Elias, they were as readable as a child's storybook. He flipped through, his fingers tracing the pathways of data, the flow of electrons, the logic gates he had designed a lifetime ago. He picked up the phone again and dialed a number he had not called in years. David Chen, attorney at law. The voice was sharp, professional. "David. It's Elias." The professionalism vanished instantly, replaced by a genuine warmth. "Eli. It's been too long. How are you? How's Lily?" "We're well," Elias said, his economy of words a familiar trait to his old friend. "I need a favor. A business transaction. Anything." "You know that," David replied without hesitation. They had been roommates in college, two scholarship kids from different worlds, Elias the engineering prodigy, David the pre-law debater. Their bond was forged in late-night study sessions and cheap pizza. "There's an asset being liquidated by a firm called Vance Capital. A vehicle. They consider it scrap. I want you to acquire it for me." "Okay," David said, his legal mind already switching on. "What's the asset? What's its supposed value? What's its real value?" "The supposed value is negligible. They're practically giving it away. The real value is significant." David paused. He knew Elias better than anyone. He knew Elias did not deal in hyperbole. If Elias, the most understated man he had ever met, called something significant, it was the kind of understatement that could hide mountains. "How significant are we talking?" "Just acquire it, David. As is, where is? Bill of sale. No warranties, expressed or implied. They will want it gone quickly and cleanly. Offer them $1,000. There was another pause, longer this time. $1,000, David repeated slowly. For something you call significant. Eli, are you sure about this? What is this thing? It's a piece of my history, Elias said, and the quiet finality in his tone was all the explanation David needed. He knew about Elena. He knew what Elias had walked away from. All right, David said, his voice firming up. $1,000 it is. I'll have my office contact their representative, a Mr. Henderson. We'll do it through a shell corporation, keep your name out of it. It will be a clean, simple transaction. They won't know who they're dealing with. Thank you, David. Don't thank me yet, David said. Just promise you'll call me when it's done and tell me what the hell I just bought for you. In Catherine Vance's world, the transaction was a footnote. Her assistant, a young, eager man named Markham who had replaced Henderson, brought her the final paperwork. He was ambitious, sycophantic, and possessed a keen instinct for mirroring his superior's moods. The Ethelgard scrap is handled, Ms. Vance, he announced, standing at a respectful distance from her desk. We received an offer from a holding company, of all things. $1,000. They've signed all the waivers. As is, no recourse. The truck is scheduled to pick it up tomorrow. The funds have already been wired. Catherine glanced at the document, a simple bill of sale. She barely registered the name of the purchasing entity, Northwood Precision Holdings LLC. It sounded small and unimportant. $1,000, she mused aloud, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Someone paid $1,000 for our garbage. Good work, Markham. You've turned a net loss into a slightly less embarrassing net loss. Markham beamed, taking the faint praise as a major victory. They sent a man to inspect it this morning. Some local mechanic type. Looked like he was more interested in kicking the tires than checking the engine. He chuckled, hoping she would join in. I don't think he had any idea what he was looking at. Probably thinks he can sell the rims for a couple $100. Catherine offered a thin, dismissive smile and initialed the paper. The mechanic, the car, the $1,000, it was all dust. Insignificant data points in a world of billion-dollar currents. The file was closed. The liability was gone. The man Markham had dismissed was, of course, Elias. He had driven his old, reliable pickup truck to the warehouse, dressed in his usual work attire, flannel shirt, worn jeans, and steel-toed boots. He met Markham at the entrance to the cavernous, dusty building. The air was stale, smelling of concrete and decay. And there it sat, in the center of a vast, empty floor, under a single, flickering fluorescent light. The Ethelgard prototypo. Even covered in a thick layer of dust, its presence was arresting. It was not a car, it was a sculpture of intent. Its lines were aggressive yet fluid, a seamless flow of unpainted carbon fiber that seemed to absorb the weak light. It sat low and wide on its massive wheels, a predator at rest. Elias felt a jolt, a phantom limb aching. He saw Elena's hand guiding the pen over the initial sketches, saw the arguments and breakthroughs, the shared look of triumph when the first carbon monocoque came out of the autoclave, flawless. Markham, with the condescending air of a zookeeper showing off a sedated animal, walked him around it. Here she is. As you can see, she is what she is. Non-operational. Total electrical fry-up, we're told. But the body panels are intact. Tires hold air. That's about all the good news. Elias said nothing. He walked slowly around the car, his eyes taking in everything. He wasn't kicking tires. He was reading a story he already knew by heart. He saw the faint stress lines near the rear suspension mounts, exactly where Elena's simulations had predicted they would appear after track testing. He ran his hand along the door seam, feeling the perfect, hairline gap he had spent a week calibrating. He knelt and looked under the front, not at the suspension, but at the main power distribution junction box. He saw the heavy gauge cables and the primary bus bars. They were pristine. No signs of scorching, no melted insulation. No catastrophic electrical fire. He moved to the driver's door and opened it. The smell of old leather and dormant electronics filled his nostrils. He slid into the tight-fitting driver's seat. It felt like coming home. His hands found the steering wheel, its shape molded to his own grip from countless hours in the development rig. He ignored the main dashboard, which was dark and lifeless. His gaze went to a small, secondary access panel below the steering column, secured by two small Allen screws. He reached into his pocket and produced a multi-tool, flipping out the correct bit. Markham watched, amused. Good luck, buddy. The AAA guys couldn't even get the dome light to come on. Elias ignored him. He removed the screws and carefully lifted the panel away. Behind it was a nest of wiring in a small, black box, the secondary diagnostic port for the core ECU, a backdoor he had designed for exactly this kind of situation. He looked at the proprietary connector, then at the bundle of wires leading from it. His eyes traced one specific wire, a thin, gray-shielded data cable. He followed it with his eyes as it disappeared deep into the dashboard. He saw no nicks, no burns, no damage. He put the panel back, replaced the screws, and got out of the car. His entire inspection had taken less than 5 minutes. "Looks good," Elias said, his first and only words to Markham. Markham laughed out loud. "Looks good. Sir, it's a 10,000-pound paperweight made of carbon fiber. But if you say so. The offer your people made is acceptable. We'll have the paperwork finalized this afternoon." The next day, a heavy-duty flatbed tow truck, the kind used for moving construction equipment, arrived at Elias's small shop. Elias directed the driver with quiet hand signals, guiding the immense, dust-covered form of the prototypo into the main bay. It dwarfed everything else, an alien artifact in a world of domestic machinery. Lily came out of the house, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Dad. What is that?" "It's a car, sweetie," Elias said, laying a hand on her shoulder. "A very complicated car that got a little bit lost." Once the truck was gone and the bay door was rolled shut, Elias stood before the silent machine. The work could now begin. But this was not a matter of wrenches and ratchets, not yet. This was a matter of diagnosis. This was the challenge that 9 of the world's top automotive restoration and specialist shops had quoted over $300,000 to even attempt. They had proposed months of painstaking disassembly, tracing every one of the thousands of wires, testing every component. They were explorers without a map. Elias had drawn the map. He went to his office and retrieved a ruggedized laptop, a battle-scarred Panasonic Toughbook from his Ethelgard days. He booted it up. The screen glowed to life, not with Windows or Mac OS, but with a stark, command-line interface running a custom Linux distribution. He plugged a specialized cable with a heavy, multi-pin connector into the laptop's serial port. This was his key. He returned to the car, opened the driver's door, and connected the other end of the cable to the secondary diagnostic port he had briefly exposed in the warehouse. He sat on a low stool next to the open door and typed a command into the laptop. Connect f/dev/ttys0 b115200 initiate _handshake _p1. The screen flickered. For a moment, nothing. Then, text began to scroll, a cascade of error messages, hundreds of them, flying up the screen in a blur of red and yellow. ECU_ERR, subsystem 0x01, fuel, NO_response. ECU_ERR, subsystem 0x02, ignition, NO_response. ECU_ERR, subsystem 0x07, TCU, handshake_fail. ECU_ERR, subsystem 0x09, BCM, voltage_low. This was the wall the other shops had run into. A total system collapse. A failure so complete and widespread that it was impossible to tell where the problem began. It was like asking a doctor to diagnose a patient where every organ was screaming in pain at once. They had wanted to start cutting, to perform exploratory surgery. Elias did not look at the errors. He ignored them completely. They were symptoms, the panicked shrieks of a system that had lost its conductor. He was looking for the conductor. He typed another command, one that bypassed the high-level error reporting and accessed the raw data stream from the ECU's primary clock and sensor bus. Stream r/dev/bus/c bus_master filter equals sys_clk pos_sends_all. The screen cleared. A new set of data began to appear, columns of hexadecimal numbers updating in real time. Most were stable, a steady, rhythmic pulse. But one column, labeled CAM_POS_B1, was flickering erratically. It wasn't dead. It was sending garbage data. A stream of nonsensical values that were poisoning the entire system. The Ethelgard's ECU, his ECU, was designed with a fail-safe. Before activating any of the car's critical systems, fuel, ignition, transmission, it performed a synchronization check between the crankshaft and both camshafts. It was a fundamental, "Are you awake and where are you?" question posed to the engine's core components. If it received a nonsensical answer from even one of those three primary position sensors, it would refuse to boot further, throwing the entire network into a state of cascading failure to prevent catastrophic engine damage. Elias watched the flickering numbers for a full minute, his expression unchanging. The problem was not a catastrophic electrical failure. It was not a fried ECU. It was a single, faulty sensor. He disconnected the laptop and walked to one of his steel cabinets. He opened a drawer filled with small, neatly labeled boxes of electronic components. He scanned the labels: Bosch, Siemens, Denso. Then his eyes landed on a small, white box with a handwritten label: Ethel. V12 chem sensor, Hall effect, batch 4. Inside, nestled in foam, was a brand new camshaft position sensor, identical to the one in the car. It was a part that had never been released to the public, a spare from the original development batch. He had half a dozen of them. He cross-referenced the part number with a note in his binder. Batch 4 had a slightly different voltage tolerance than the batch 3 sensors used in the final build. A minor, almost insignificant change. But he knew his own design. The ECU was sensitive to that specific voltage variance on startup. It would read it as a fault. He took the new sensor to his electronics workbench. He placed it in a vise and, with a jeweler's file, gently shaved a tiny amount of material off one of the mounting tabs. This would change its installed position by less than half a millimeter, just enough to alter the air gap between the sensor and the camshaft's reluctor wheel, compensating for the voltage difference. It was a modification born of pure, undiluted institutional knowledge. Accessing the Bank 1 camshaft sensor on the Prototypo's engine was, by design, difficult for an outsider. For the designer, it was simple. He knew the exact sequence of panels to remove, the one specific coolant hose to disconnect to create a clear path. In 7 minutes, he had the old sensor out. He plugged the new, slightly modified sensor into the harness, bolted it into place, and reconnected the hose. The entire process, from connecting the laptop to seating the new sensor, had taken 11 minutes. He walked back to the driver's seat. He did not bother reconnecting the laptop. He put the key, a simple, unadorned piece of milled aluminum, into the ignition. He paused, his hand resting on it, the silence of the workshop vast and deep around him. This was the moment of truth. He turned the key. For a second, there was only the whir of the high-pressure fuel pumps priming. Then, the starter engaged with a sharp bark, and the massive 7.3-liter V12 engine erupted into life. It was not the ragged, coughing start of a long-dormant machine. It was a clean, instantaneous ignition, settling immediately into a low, menacing, and perfectly stable 800 revolutions per minute idle. The sound filled the workshop, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the concrete floor and up into Elias's bones. It was the sound of his past, of Elena's laughter, of a shared dream, roaring back to life. Lily appeared at the door connecting the shop to the house, her hands over her ears but a wide, brilliant smile on her face. Elias looked at her, then at the purring engine, and a feeling of quiet, profound satisfaction washed over him. The Diagnose, the one that had stumped an industry and been quoted at over $250,000, was complete. It had cost him 11 minutes and a $52 sensor he already owned. Now, the real work began. The car ran, but it was far from perfect. Years of neglect had taken their toll. The Diagnose was the spark, but the restoration would be the fire. For the next 3 months, Elias Thorne's workshop became a sanctuary of meticulous resurrection. He worked with an unhurried, focused intensity that was almost meditative. He started with the fluids, the lifeblood of the machine. He drained the old, sludgy oil, the discolored coolant, the stale fuel that smelled of varnish. He flushed the systems again and again, until what came out was as clean as what went in. He dropped the fuel tank, a complex, baffled cell of carbon fiber and aluminum, and cleaned it by hand, replacing every rubber hose and gasket with modern, ethanol-resistant equivalents. He moved to the electrical system. While the core was sound, years of sitting had caused corrosion on minor contact points. He did not just clean them. He disassembled every major connector, from the headlights to the taillights, polishing each individual pin with a jeweler's cloth and applying a thin coat of dielectric grease before reassembly. He tested the resistance of every major circuit, comparing the readings to the original specifications listed in his binders. He enlisted the help of 2 old colleagues from the Ethelgard days, men who had been cast aside by the industry just as he had. One was a master fabricator named Thomas, the other an interior specialist named Ben. They came not for the money, Elias paid them fairly, but he wasn't rich yet, but for the project. For the chance to work on the prototypo again, to finish what they had started. They worked in comfortable silence, each a master in his own domain, communicating with nods and gestures, a shared language of competence. Ben stripped the interior, treating the leather with conditioners until it was supple and rich again, restitching a single loose seam on the driver's seat bolster with the original thread he had saved. Thomas, the fabricator, painstakingly polished the unpainted carbon fiber body, a multi-stage process that took 2 weeks. He didn't add a clear coat, he restored the raw, satin finish of the resin itself, bringing out the intricate weave of the fibers until the car's skin looked like a dark, shimmering textile. Elias, meanwhile, focused on the heart. He fine-tuned the engine, calibrating the idle, the throttle response, the fuel maps. He used his custom software to dial in the car not to its factory settings, but to a perfected state, an ideal version that had only existed in the theoretical models during its development. He worked with the patience of a watchmaker, the precision of a surgeon. By the end of the 3rd month, the Ethelgard prototypo was no longer a resurrected machine. It was a new one. It was better than it had been on the day the company folded. It was the car he and Elena had dreamed of building, fully realized. It sat in the center of his workshop, not under a flickering fluorescent tube, but under the warm glow of new LED lighting, its carbon body gleaming, its engine a silent promise of astonishing power. Elias did not list the car for public auction. He did not call a high-end broker. He wrote a single, short email. The recipient was a man named Alastair Sterling, a reclusive British industrialist and arguably the most discerning car collector in the world. Sterling was known for prizing engineering significance and pristine originality above all else. His collection was a private museum of mechanical genius, and he was notoriously difficult to reach. But Elias had an old email address, given to him by the original CEO of Ethelgard, reserved for a day that had never come. The email was simple. It contained 3 high-resolution photographs, one of the car, one of the engine bay, and one of the VIN plate showing 001, and a single sentence, Ethelgard Prototypo V12, VIN 001. Operational. Original. Available. 24 hours later, he received a reply, I will be there in 2 days. Alastair Sterling was a tall, lean man in his late 60s with piercing blue eyes and an air of quiet authority. He arrived at Elias's shop not in a limousine, but in a nondescript rental sedan he drove himself. He wore a simple tweed jacket and looked more like a university professor than a billionaire. He greeted Elias with a firm handshake and a nod, his eyes already fixed on the car. For 20 minutes, Sterling walked around the prototypo, his silence more profound than any exclamation. He ran a gloved hand over the carbon fiber, peered into the engine bay, and knelt to examine the undercarriage with a small flashlight. He was not looking for flaws. He was appreciating perfection. Finally, he turned to Elias. The journals said it was irreparable. A complete electrical write-off. The journals were misinformed, Elias said. Sterling's eyes twinkled. Clearly. They also said the original engineering team had disbanded to the 4 winds. Some of us did not travel far. Sterling nodded slowly, a deep respect dawning in his expression. He understood. He was not just looking at a car, he was meeting its creator. He asked a few questions, but they were not about horsepower or top speed. They were questions only an engineer would ask. What's the data refresh rate on the primary CAN bus? Did you solve the harmonic resonance issue on the intake plenum above 7,000 revolutions per minute? Is the transmission control unit running the original firmware or the revised 1.1b code? Elias answered each question with quiet, factual precision. It was not a sales pitch. It was a conversation between 2 men who spoke the same language of mechanical truth. After the last question, Sterling stood in silence for another minute, looking from the car to Elias and back again. "I have been collecting for 40 years, he said, his voice soft but firm. "I have acquired cars from the garages of kings and the vaults of sheiks. But this is different. This is not an acquisition. It is a preservation of genius." He looked Elias directly in the eye. $18 million. Wired to your account within the hour. Elias did not react. He simply nodded once. The number was abstract. The validation was real. The deal was done. The news broke a month later. It was not on the mainstream news, but in the pages of The Apex, an exclusive, subscription-only journal for the world's most elite car collectors. The cover featured a stunning, full-page photograph of the Ethelgard Prototipo, shot against a stark white background. The headline was simple: "The Ghost of Ethelgard, Prototipo 001 Resurrected. Sold to Sterling for record sum." The article detailed the car's legendary status, its supposed demise, and its miraculous reappearance in the hands of the world's most respected collector. It mentioned the rumored sale price of $18 million and lauded the unknown master artisan, who had achieved the impossible, restoring the car to a condition described by Sterling himself as better than new. In his gleaming office, Markham was scrolling through his morning news feed when a link to an article summarizing the Apex's story appeared. He clicked on it, intrigued by the name Ethelgard. He read the first paragraph and his blood went cold. He saw the picture of the car, no longer dusty and forlorn, but a gleaming masterpiece. He read the sale price, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He frantically searched for more information, his hands shaking as he typed. He found another article that mentioned the car had been sold for scrap months earlier by Vance Capital. The $1,000 bill of sale. The quiet mechanic in the flannel shirt. The condescending jokes. It all came crashing down on him with the force of a physical blow. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, and walked, stiff-legged, toward Catherine Vance's office. He found her reviewing market projections, a picture of serene, untouchable power. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice thin and reedy. She looked up, annoyed by the interruption and his pale, panicked expression. "What is it, Markham?" He placed his tablet on her desk, the article displayed on the screen. "The Ethelgard prototype," he whispered. Catherine glanced at the screen. She saw the car. She saw the headline. She saw the number. $18 million. For a long moment, she simply stared, her mind refusing to connect the dots. Then, slowly, the cold, perfect composure of her face began to crack. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of furious comprehension. "Tell me this is a joke," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "It was sold," Markham stammered, "to Alastair Sterling. The holding company that bought it from us. Northwood Precision Holdings. It must have been a front for the men who restored it." "The mechanic," she breathed, the words tasting like ash. "The man you said was going to sell the rims for scrap." The fury erupted. It was a cold, controlled storm. She did not shout. She became terrifyingly still. "You told me it was worthless. You brought me a bill of sale for $1,000 and you smiled. You signed it," Markham blurted out, "a fatal error. You told me to get rid of it. You said, give it away." Catherine's eyes narrowed into slits of ice. "Get out," she said, the two words carrying the weight of a guillotine. "Clear your desk. You are done." Markham stumbled out of her office, a man professionally executed. Catherine was left alone with the tablet, the glowing screen a monument to the single greatest error of her career. It was not just the money. It was the humiliation. She, Catherine Vance, had been made a fool of. By a no-name mechanic in a flannel shirt. She had dismissed an $18 million asset as garbage. She had held a masterpiece in her hand and thrown it away because it had a red number next to it on a spreadsheet. Her entire philosophy, her entire career, was built on the infallible accuracy of her judgment. And that judgment had just been proven catastrophically, publicly wrong. Her first call was to her legal team. They were quick and brutal. The bill of sale was ironclad. As is, where is, no recourse. She had signed away all rights for $1,000. There was no legal path back. Her second call was to a private investigator. Find the man who bought the Ethelgard prototype. The one who calls himself Northwood Precision. I want his name, his address, his history. Everything. 2 days later, the report was on her desk. Elias Thorne. Former lead systems engineer at Ethelgard. Co-designer of the Prototypo V12. Widower. Single father. Owner of a small, independent repair shop in a town she had never heard of. The report included a picture of Elias, standing outside his shop, looking exactly as Markham had described him, unassuming, quiet, ordinary. But now she saw him differently. She saw the quiet confidence, the deep, unshakable competence. He hadn't been lucky. He had known. From the very beginning, he had known. There was only one thing left to do. She had to see him. She had to understand. She had to try, somehow, to regain control of a situation that had spiraled into a nightmare of her own making. She drove herself. Her gleaming, black German sedan felt alien and ostentatious as she pulled into the small, gravel parking lot of Thorne's Auto Repair. The sign was simple, hand-painted. The building was clean, unpretentious. Through the open bay door, she could see him. He was working on an old pickup truck, his back to her. She got out of her car, her expensive heels crunching on the gravel. The sound was loud in the quiet afternoon. Elias stopped what he was doing and turned slowly. He looked at her, then at her car, his expression unreadable. He wiped his hands on a clean rag and waited. She walked toward him, the power dynamic she relied on completely inverted. Here, in his world of tangible things, her suit and her status were meaningless. She was the supplicant. He was the master. Mr. Thorne, she began, her voice strained. I am Catherine Vance. Elias nodded slightly. He already knew. I believe we have been, indirectly involved in a business transaction, she said, trying to project an authority she did not feel. Regarding the Ethelgard prototype. Elias remained silent, letting her words hang in the air. That car was an asset of my company, she continued, her voice gaining a harder edge. You acquired it under misleading pretenses. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Elias's mouth. I acquired it after your company declared it worthless scrap, he said, his voice calm and even. Your representative quoted a price. My representative accepted. Your company signed a legally binding contract. There were no misleading pretenses. There was only a difference in assessment. His simple, factual statement disarmed her completely. He was not gloating. He was not angry. He was simply stating the truth. It was this quiet, unassailable confidence that infuriated her more than anything. She shifted tactics. Your work is remarkable, she admitted, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. Vance Capital is always looking to partner with unique talent. We could form a new division. A restoration and specialist engineering group. With you at the head. We could provide the capital, the marketing, the global reach. You could name your price. It was her ultimate move. The offer of money and power, the tools she used to shape the world. She was offering to buy him, to absorb his talent back into her spreadsheet world. Elias looked past her, toward the small house behind the shop where he could see Lily's light on in the window. He thought of the quiet evenings, the freedom from deadlines and corporate politics, the simple, profound joy of building something real with his own hands. He had already had a life of ambition and pressure. He had no desire to return to it. He turned his gaze back to Catherine Vance, a woman clad in armor of wealth and power, looking utterly lost in his world of steel and grease. No, he said. The word was not angry. It was not defiant. It was a simple, quiet, and absolute fact. No, she repeated, incredulous. I don't need a partner, Elias said. And I don't need your capital. I have everything I need right here. He gestured with his head toward the tidy workshop, the tools on the wall, the home behind it. He had his work. He had his daughter. He had his peace. He had won, not by destroying her, but by refusing to become her. Catherine stared at him, and for the first time, she truly understood the magnitude of her misjudgment. She had not just misjudged the value of a car. She had misjudged the value of a man. She had looked at Elias Thorne and seen a simple mechanic. She had failed to see the quiet master, the man whose wealth was not measured in dollars but in skill, integrity, and a life built on his own uncompromising terms. There was nothing more to say. She turned, her shoulders slumped, and walked back to her expensive car, defeated not by a rival, but by a reality she could not comprehend. Elias watched her drive away, then turned and went back to his work. The engine of the old pickup truck still needed tuning. He never saw Catherine Vance again. The story of the Ethelgard and the $1,000 sale became a quiet legend in the high-stakes world of finance, a cautionary tale whispered about the CEO who threw away a fortune. Vance Capital's reputation for infallibility was permanently tarnished, and a year later, after a series of less dramatic but equally telling missteps, Catherine was quietly forced out by her board. Elias used the $18 million not for luxury, but for foundation. He paid off his mortgage. He set up a trust for Lily's education that would allow her to pursue any dream she chose. And he invested the rest back into his work. He bought the building he was in, and the empty lot next to it. He built a new, larger facility, but it was designed on the same principles as his old shop: clean, orderly, functional. He didn't put up a flashy sign. The simple, hand-painted, Thorne's Auto Repair was replaced by a small, elegant brass plaque that read, Thorne Precision Engineering. He hired Marcus, Thomas, and Ben full-time. They did not just restore cars. They became a high-level engineering consultancy. They designed and built bespoke components for racing teams, solved complex mechanical problems for aerospace firms, and took on the projects no one else could fix, the modern equivalents of the Ethelgard. Their reputation grew not through advertising, but through word of mouth in the circles that mattered. Their value was in their skill, their substance, not their surface. Years passed. The business thrived, a quiet beacon of excellence. Elias remained unchanged. He still wore flannel shirts. He still cleaned his own tools. His greatest satisfaction came not from the balance in his bank account, but from the quiet hum of a perfectly running machine and the sound of his daughter's laughter filtering in from the yard. One evening, he was standing in the main workshop, now filled with the clean, beautiful shapes of complex projects. Lily, now a teenager with her mother's bright, intelligent eyes, was working beside him, patiently soldering a circuit board for a school project. She was as quiet and methodical as he was. She looked up from her work, at the organized, successful world her father had built. "Dad," she asked, "that car, the one from a long time ago? The one Mr. Sterling bought? Were you trying to get rich?" Elias looked at his daughter, the center of his universe, the motivation for every choice he had ever made. He shook his head slowly. "No, sweetie," he said, his voice soft. "I was just trying to finish something I started with your mom. I was just trying to prove that good work matters." He looked around the pristine workshop, a testament to that simple, powerful idea. He was not a corporate titan. He was not a celebrity. He was a craftsman. A father. And in his quiet, methodical world, he was victorious.